This week it was the Labour Party conference in Liverpool, and it was badged as the conference that was make or break for Keir Starmer. Well, the Prime Minister delivered. What does that mean for the future of the government, the future of the party, and the future of Andy Burnham? This is the Downtown Den Politics Podcast.
The return of the sausages.
All sorts of things that I would have wanted as a kid that I couldn't have, right? Famously, Sky TV.
How'd that happen? I guess I just forgot what was going on.
They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats.
Yay, it worked.
So welcome back to the Downtown Den Politics Podcast with me, Frank McKenna, and of course, Jim Hancock and Joe Phillips. And we're a bit late this week in recording because we wanted to see how the Labour Party conference went. We wanted to listen to Keir Starmer's speech, or in my case, go into the hall and watch his speech. And we've been rather busy at the conference, as Francesca, our producer, will tell you. Not only was I in and around the ACC at Liverpool, where the conference was hosted for the fourth consecutive year, and the city did a great job. Congratulations once again to Liverpool for hosting this conference in the expert way that it does. But I was buzzing around, meeting ministers, SPADs, mayors, local government leaders, and just trying to take the temperature of the party. And we at Downtown did 3 fringe events. We had Andy Burnham and Luciana Berger along to one of our fringe events. Then we had an excellent lunchtime gathering with Liam Byrne, who is the chairman of the Business and Trade Select Committee. And then last night we had Thomas Simmons, who is the, I said Attorney General last night. He's actually the Paymaster General. And it was a faux pas because the other guest in the room was Emily Thornberry, who, of course, thinks she should have been the Attorney General, but has ended up, I think, with a better job as the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. And I have to say, although all of those MPs and the Baroness Berger were very impressive, Emily Thornberry gave a barnstorming performance last night and really impressed our members. So that was my sort of week. But I'm in the hall and I'm listening to Keir Starmer's speech, and you guys know this because you're experienced conference goers as well. And it was electrifying. It was very well received. But on occasion, you can get a bit carried away when you sat in there and you've got all the pomp and the ceremony around the leader. Helped, I have to say, by a tremendous contribution from, I don't know if you've seen this, guys, Margaret Aspinall, who, of course, is the lead campaigner for Hillsborough, the Hillsborough Law, which is now being delivered, and she was great. And then Starmer came on that and delivered. I have to say this because I've seen Keir speak 4 or 5 times at conferences now. The best conference speech he's ever delivered. But be good to get, as I say, from people who watched it from outside the hall, your reflections on that. Start with you, if I may, Joe.
I was very pleasantly surprised. I was expecting the usual sort of word salad delivered in a wooden bowl, and I thought he was great. It's the first time I've seen him actually seem human. There seemed to be real passion. He'd got a sense of humour. I mean, he was funny when he said, "You all know what my dad did by now." And that sort of self-deprecating humour I thought really worked. I mean, there were parts of it that I thought were very moving. I think he certainly, from watching it on the television, it sounded electric, the response and the ovations and things. And I would say that he certainly left Liverpool in a better frame of mind and in a better state than he arrived. No, I thought it was great. I thought it was one of his best performances.
And the general feeling, Jim, I have to tell you, of delegates from across the party now, so constituency members right through to cabinet ministers, was that actually the Andy Burnham leadership challenge helped Starmer enormously, both in terms of an awful lot of people, however displeased they are with the government 14, 15 months in, did not necessarily see that sort of attack or commentary as helpful to the party or the government, and therefore Keir Starmer was always going to be willed on to make a good speech. But secondly, and I think perhaps more importantly, they don't necessarily see Andy Burnham or anyone else at this moment in time as being able to do much better because of the major challenges that Starmer faces. And the thing that people kept saying to me, and we've mentioned this a few times on the podcast, of course, is that can you imagine, insert the name, doing as well as Starmer has done with Trump or with Macron or with Carney on that international stage? And perhaps that's something that he is taking into the hall with him, both in terms of that renewed confidence, but also I think when he's had his back to the wall in the past, he's tended to perform better. And he did come out fighting, Jim.
Yes, well, he had obviously, the circumstances sort of produced this. He was faced a horrible background to it with the loss of Angela Rayner, who I understand now is thinking of a comeback. We could perhaps discuss that. I don't know. And Mandelson. And obviously the economic situation. Then on the eve of conference, Andy Burnham, as I've said in my blog, I'm afraid I have a lot of time for Andy, but you try and upturn the Labour Party conference 2 days before it's going to start, you're going to get a backlash. So Starmer, and Starmer had already dealt with that. I'm not discussing the mayor's ambitions. That was a very clever phrase. But he did. He's never going to be the great orator, swaying backwards and forwards and across the rostrum and that sort of thing. And I thought it started fairly stolidly, but he really rose to the occasion. And there was that, I don't know whether it was orchestrated by conference organisers, but when he was listing Labour's successes, and there have been successes, that continuous applause underneath him, that was rather effective moment. That
I think it took everyone by surprise, Jim. It certainly wasn't orchestrated, and I think it took him by surprise. But what was good, and I think demonstrated a confidence, was he continued to talk, whereas in the past he'd have stopped, and you lose the momentum of the speech then. Whereas he just kept going and raising his voice, which worked really well. Yes,
it did. It did. Yes, I mean, Tony Benn used to do that. He used to talk through the applause. I don't need the applause. I'm just delivering the messages. Yeah. So it was, it was a performance. I mean, it's coming to the crunch of it. A man who went into the conference with a lot of questions over his leadership has. I mean, to say bought himself some time is slightly understating it, but he has. We can now see a pathway. I mean, obviously, the next difficulty will be the budget, because there were hints in the speech that there's some tough decisions to be taken, and that didn't particularly go down that well. And certainly contributions by Rachel Reeves and the Home Secretary telling some home truths didn't go down particularly well. But time has been bought. Everything will now really depend on the budget. If that doesn't go well, then we could be in for a difficult winter, and these questions that we're asking will arise again. But for now, he has done that. And just one last thing, you're absolutely right, both of you, to draw attention to his foreign record, and that's maybe what a lot of people admired, and you've picked this up at the conference, Frank. But of course, he didn't mention Donald Trump in the conference hall at all, because given the sort of nature of the audience, there would have probably been some unhelpful reactions. But so it was very much a domestic orientated speech, and I think it probably needed that because of all the anxieties that people have got.
I think he was trying to talk to party members and get them back on side, of course, but also trying to give a message to the country, reminding people of, I wouldn't necessarily say Labour values, I'd say British values.
Yeah.
And I thought there was a strong passage in his speech where he was simply giving very simple examples of great things that people do in this country still to contribute to their community and to society, which I thought was very effective. But the other thing that got huge cheers in the audience. He only did it twice when he mentioned Brexit. And again, I think what people are looking to do now is develop a much stronger, firmer narrative about the impact that Brexit has had, not simply economically, but also on the issues that he would say Farage and co have a grievance about, not least immigration. And there were a number of events that I attended through the last few days where people were showing that the numbers are just incredible. Pre-Brexit, immigration stood at around 250,000. The Johnson explosion, as Farage tries to dress it up, was 1 million almost that year, and it's all to do with the ripping up of the Dublin Agreement. Now, people out there are simply not talking about this because they don't know, and it's okay saying, well, we've just got to, which Labour have tried to do. We've got to just put Brexit in a box and forget all about it as if it's never happened. But I think pennies dropped. We can actually start to talk about the impact of Brexit now and start to remind people who is responsible for Brexit. And again, as Emily Thornberry said last night, other than Farage, all of the other key architects of Brexit have left the political stage.
Yeah, and
Farage is the only one still there.
And there would never have been a referendum if Cameron wasn't frit by UKIP. And I think you're absolutely right, Frank. And I think many people, will welcome the fact that Keir Starmer is not going to tiptoe around it and say, okay, you are the man that wanted Brexit. This is what it's bought us, and it needs to be hammered home that it lays firmly at the door of Nigel Farage, and then executed badly by Cameron, May, Johnson, Sunak and Truss. But who started it? It was Nigel Farage, who then walked away, don't forget.
So I think that was well received by the audience. As I say, those very simple examples of great work that's being done in local communities, very warmly received. The recapturing of patriotism and the flag waving, again, all very well received. Where I would be concerned if I was the leadership of the party, I'm not just talking about the Prime Minister here, is when he told that very good anecdote of knocking on a door at a by-election in Greater Manchester. I think it was a Rochdale by-election.
And it was Oldham, I think.
Oldham, that's correct,
Yeah.
You're right. And he basically explained, too often liberals like us are seen to be not wanting to just close the debate, close the discussion. We don't want to hear this. And actually, if you even raise the issue, then you're a racist. And what he was explaining was this working class woman who he'd knocked on her door, he's canvassing, felt obliged to explain to him before she got anywhere near the issue of immigration, I'm not a racist. My neighbours are Asian. I was at the wedding. She's showing photo albums and he's wondering, where's this going? And she felt she needed to do that in order to have a conversation with a Labour politician in order that he didn't just think she was a racist. Now, it wasn't booed, of course, but there was no standing ovation for that, right? A ripple of applause. And then we get into tough choices. He didn't go anywhere near what those tough choices might be, but we know it's welfare cuts. It's looking at public expenditure. Again, not a massive amount of enthusiasm in the audience for that. So there are challenges ahead because he absolutely has not done himself any harm in terms of his own leadership, but in terms of where the government needs to go next, those issues haven't gone away on the back of a fantastic speech. And so we're sat here today saying he's looking more secure. He's reclaimed the party in terms of his leadership, and he's given some kind of route map, certainly in terms of what Labour values are against the main opposition at this moment in time, which is reform. But what he didn't do, and maybe for good reason, you can't do everything in one speech, but he didn't try and take on those doubters in the party in the way that Blair would have, for example, over things like Clause 4 and tuition fees. And that, Jim, I think, is still something that is going to cause some difficulties moving forward.
Yes, although of course he has, in a sense, ripped up the Blair promise on 50% of people going to university. I mean, it came out.
I think that was a good move.
Yeah, well, I know. I'm just saying, out of his father's experience, his father was undervalued, and he went on then to say, and sort of that's why we're going to give equal prominence to good apprenticeships as opposed to going to university. I thought that was very, very significant. I mean, just going back to one or two of the points you made, you got the place wrong because you said Rochdale, Frank. The reason you mentioned Rochdale was, of course, that Gordon Brown called a lady a bigoted woman, which is exactly what Starmer was talking about yesterday. Just one other thing we might explore. I mean, you talk about welfare cuts, but of course the conference was riddled with rumours that the two-child benefit limit is going to be uplifted. I mean, you know, people are talking about, will it just be three children or four? But I mean, you know, potentially a £3 billion headache for Rachel Reeves. So, you know, there's still some confusion about the message and the direction of the government, in my opinion.
Well, I think that those big challenges and those issues that we know they're going to have to face and overcome were the things that were not taken on head on. And I guess that is partly as a result of the fact that he had his back to the wall. He didn't want to go too far in terms of antagonising the troops. But as I say, at some point, Joe, he is going to have to try and get these MPs who have been a little bit weak, as we've said in recent times, in terms of making these tough choices. I'm not sure that two-child benefit cap is going to be lifted immediately. I think that's going to be said as an ambition, an aspiration. And interestingly, obviously, the Chancellor and others around the Treasury have been listening to our podcast because I've been banging on about an increase in VAT for months now. And I think if she is going to be bold in November, which I think she has to be in order to build on this speech that Starmer's just delivered, then she's going to have to raise one of the three big taxes, and VAT is the most obvious one.
Yeah, raise VAT and scrap the freeze on fuel duty, which has been in place for 15 years for no reason anymore. And I think, you know, you can talk about lifting the cap, the two-child benefit cap, but at the same time, you have to say, and the quid pro quo of that is we're going to look at the triple lock. It is no longer sustainable, you know, because you can't have everything. And I think, you know, just the point that we all know is when you make a conference speech, you're talking to so many different audiences. Watching it all the way through, as you did in the hall, Frank, I think he got what he wanted to, which was a feeling of optimism, hope, support. Won't take him very far. It'll only take him probably, you know, for another couple of weeks or something. But it's something where people can walk out of there and they can feel better about it. They're not feeling apologetic. But of course, what the story has been is the clip of his attack on Farage and the racist stuff. And nobody, you know, on the news bulletins or the papers used the list of Labour's achievements or anything else, or talked about apprenticeships and ending the university aspirations. They all talked about that. So, you know, that I think is where he's got to be looking very carefully at about how that plays out, because of Gordon Brown and the bigoted woman, Hillary Clinton and the deplorables, you know, and Jim and I were talking just before we came on air. You know, it's not helpful when you've got the Deputy Prime Minister accusing Nigel Farage of flirting with Hitler Youth, you know, which was 30 years before he was born.
Yeah, I think that, you know, you've got to be careful with language. And I've said previously, I'm not a massive fan of David Lammy. I think he's, you know, he's a bit like the dodgy goalkeeper who's always got a mistake in him, and that was a mistake. I know he apologised very quickly, but the damage is done as soon as you say these things now. It's instantaneous in terms of the news. So they have got to be more careful in terms of their language. But equally, I think that there was a bit too much timidity in terms of calling out some of this stuff from reform for what it is. And when you had Labour ministers just a couple of weekends ago reluctant to call Tommy Robinson and the people who were on that march racist, then I think there did need to be a correction. So for me, I absolutely agree, Joe, that the Lammy comments went too far. But the policy in terms of deporting 600,000 people, some of those people who've been here for over a quarter of a century, have contributed massively to this country, have got kids, have got grandkids. It is a racist policy, in my opinion. It should be called out as such.
Oh, and completely.
But there has been a reluctance to actually call him a racist. I mean, I saw countless interviews with cabinet ministers where they were being goaded almost by the interviewer to say that Farage was racist, and they've always gone back to this. Well, the policy is racist without actually wanting to go over that, because obviously the fear is that in these marches in London that we've seen, there are obviously racists, but there are also a lot of people who've got genuine concerns about immigration, and you don't want to insult people who potentially could come back to Labour.
No, but I think also you've got to start to look at the polls a little more with a little bit more sophistication than they are at the moment. Reform have basically eaten the Tories' breakfast. Now, I'm not suggesting they haven't taken any votes from Labour. Of course they are. Look at Labour's position in the polls as well. But Labour's support has splintered, and it's not simply gone to reform. It's gone to the Liberal Democrats. It's gone to the Greens. It may, if he ever gets his act together with Sarah Sultana, some of the support may start to dissipate to that far left grouping as well. So you can't simply keep tagging to the right, not calling this stuff out for what it is. And it is racist. And again, anybody who has watched the hundreds, if not thousands, of clips from that Tommy Robinson march and interviews from the people who are on the march, there might have been, I'm sure there were, people who are genuinely concerned about immigration. But even if I'm genuinely concerned about immigration, I ain't going to a march with a fucking thug like Tommy Robinson leading it. So I think of those 150,000, Jim, I'll give 10,000 the benefit.
But let's be careful. Farage has dissociated himself from Tommy Robinson. We have to be fair about that.
Yeah, but it was the march that they were failing to call out just 2 weeks ago. So as I say, I think it's good that they've now got to the point to say, well, listen, there is a line, and Robinson and his crew have crossed it. And with this particular policy, so has Farage. Doesn't mean he's a racist, but he's got it badly wrong on this. And we feel as though it is racist, and it actually encourages a narrative in this country which is un-British. And I think that was the message that he got across forcibly yesterday. Now, we will only know in 3, 4, 5 weeks' time as to whether this positivity that he and his team will be feeling today is something that is sustainable. And such is the nature of politics and everything else in this country, where it's instantaneous. The headlines could change again tomorrow. Who knows? And I think that what could have been potentially a disastrous conference for him, and that speech did have to be a humding, and it was, has turned out to be a good one. But that doesn't mean that he's out of the woods or the government are out of the woods yet. It's what they do now. The budget obviously is the next big set piece event. But of course, before then, we've got the announcement of the deputy leadership result. And you can only say, well done to the party managers. That was almost a non-story.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm glad you said that. I mean, were Bridget Phillips and was Lucy Powell much in evidence?
They were both there. I bumped into both of them, said a quick hello. I know that Bridget was doing a hustings with Progress just as I left this afternoon. So that they're both out and both campaigning. And Bridget, I think, has got quite a bit of union support. Lucy's picking up a lot of constituency support. But it seemed to me that what Labour are trying to do rightly with that contest is basically say the members will decide and Keir will be comfortable with whichever one of them wins it. And actually, when the more you listen to Lucy Powell, the more you can understand and appreciate that she ain't going to be the rebel without a cause. She is clearly, and I think rightly saw, that she lost her job as leader of the House. Certainly that she wasn't given an alternative cabinet position, the very least. But she's never been a disloyal cabinet member or shadow cabinet member. She's always been loyal to the leadership. And she, as I said last week, I think, she's Labour to her fingertips. So if, and I do expect her to win the deputy leadership, that does happen, I think it'll be fine for Keir Starmer. Yeah. But interesting the way they manage that, yeah? Mm. And hats off to them. They must be really pleased with themselves. So final word on the Starmer speech before we take a short break. I want to go around the shadow cabinet and see who else you think did well this week. But Jim, marks out of 10 for that speech from him?
I'd say 7 out of 10. Yeah, I mean, the content was good. His presentation still leaves something to be desired, but that talking through that applause when the list of achievements was being made was a big political moment. I mean, we didn't have a moment in the speech like we had 40 years ago in the famous taxi speech by Neil Kinnock, which some of our older listeners will remember. It is exactly 40 years ago since we were in Bournemouth for that speech. So they don't, those really memorable conference speeches don't come around all that often. But yeah, I mean, if we're going to talk about the other members of the cabinet after the break, we can do that, because some of them had different, rather interesting receptions, I thought.
Yeah, for sure. Joe, marks out of 10 for his speech?
I would go the same with Jim, with 7 out of 10. But in terms of improvement, and certainly, whether he's got somebody different helping him with his presentation, and he's not a natural speaker, but I think his his improvement would be 8 out of 10.
I give him an 8. I think he's never going to be the most charismatic. He's not a tub thumper. He's not a Kinnock. He's not a Blair. But I think in terms of the presentation on Tuesday, 8 out of 10 for Keir, and he'll be pleased with it. So after the break, we'll talk about some of his colleagues and how they fared at the conference. Stay with us. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to this week's Downtown Den Politics podcast with me, Frank McKenna, Jim Hancock and Joe Phillips. So we've analysed Keir Starmer's speech, but of course all of the cabinet ministers get their moment in the sun, some more so than others. And the some more so than others this week, I thought, was Wes Streeting, who was out and about on podcasts, on newscasts. His own speech went down very well in the conference. He was at a couple of things that I attended, and he clearly one of the most popular ministers as far as party membership is concerned. And our producer Francesca is nodding in agreement because she absolutely loves Wes Streeting. I thought he was he had a really good conference, and I think that Rachel Reeves did what we'd have expected of Rachel Reeves to do, which was that steady Eddie approach, not say anything that's going to scare the horses, a hint or two that maybe VAT might go up, one or two other issues that she didn't really deny, like that 2-child benefit cap, Jim, but didn't confirm either. Shabana Mahmood, of course, talked of as a future potential leader, now Home Secretary, gave a speech which I think will have been better received in the country than it was in the conference hall, that's for sure. And then I think of the other cabinet members, and this may just be a bit of bias because of our business interest, of course, but Peter Kyle had a good conference as well from what I could see. So that was from me inside of the conference centre. You guys watch it on the telly and seeing the media coverage. So, Joe, what did you make of the performance of the other cabinet members?
I think Rachel Reeves, unfortunately, is a terrible, terrible speaker. She is wooden. She's got an irritating voice, and she said nothing. And I think, you know, you could feel hearts plummet. There is no way. If there's no way if she said, okay, we're going to abolish income tax and everybody's going to get £1 million each week, she would still make it sound miserable. She can't help it. It's just her mannerism. So I'm not a fan, and I have seen her do better. I agree with you about Peter Kyle. But he, you know, we know he's a very good performer, as we know from the Downtown in Business reception at Westminster the previous week. Wes Streeting, it's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, widely well received in the conference hall, a consummate performer, and nobody mentions him as a potential leadership campaigner. And I think the most interesting person, and I've said it before and I'll say it again, I think Shabana Mahmood will be the first woman leader of the Labour Party. I think she's really smart. And I think you're absolutely right, Frank. Her speech was not what the hall necessarily wanted to hear, but it's what the country needed to hear. And she is the biggest weapon, if you like, in the armory against reform. You know, apart from anything else, she's a Muslim woman, but she's as tough as old boots. She's turning things around. She's not afraid to call things out, you know, how they are. And I think she was very interesting in her response when queried about the comments about reform being racist, that she said, oh no, it's much more nuanced than that. It's not racism. She's seriously intelligent. She's a good performer. I thought she was great. And that was really all the ones that I saw. I mean, I thought Heidi Alexander did a sterling job doing the broadcast rounds. You know, she's another safe pair of hands. I thought she was great. I think Ed Miliband is struggling terribly. And I think the whole net zero thing is a very, very big problem within the Labour Party. And he is not articulating it well enough to persuade the unions, never mind the country, that actually this is the way we have to go.
It's a great point, that last one, Joe, because given the fact that that was a central part of Labour's promise in terms of its economic growth ambitions, you know, it's going to be the net zero agenda that's going to drive this forward. Ed Miliband was hardly seen. And I didn't even mention him in my remarks because of that. Jim?
Yes, well, I think Ed Miliband is actually more popular. I mean, there's talk about him making a comeback as a leadership candidate. I think he has some popularity amongst the grassroots. And of course, Sir Keir tried to move him and he refused and managed to refuse and stayed in his position, which suggests that they did want to downgrade the green policy. So he's still there fighting his corner. I just want to offer this thought that Shabana Mahmood's speech was pretty strong meat for the Labour conference. I know she was talking to the country outside, but I think I'm slightly less of the view that she'll become leader of the Labour Party. I think she's loomed up on the right there, and you've got to have support from your base. And if you're tacking too far towards reform, I think I think her chances of leading the party were slightly diminished by that speech. But you know, all these opinions are available. Rachel obviously got away with it. I mean, she was going to be the harbinger of bad news, and you know, we're all waiting for her budget rather than the conference speech. It could have gone worse for her, but I agree with everything Joe says about her presentation style, and it did. I'm afraid it is important in this day and age. And of course, Wes Streeting was Wes. You know, I mean, his position's been enhanced by Andy's stumbles over the last couple of weeks. Wes is not worried about being in hock to the bond markets, and he made a very effective speech linked to the reform threatening to expel all sorts of people who are working in the health service. In the way he talked about a consultant that had said that he was worried about his position. He says, nothing to be worried about under Labour. You are valued in what you do. And the way he puts it over is first class. So, I mean, Labour have got some good performers now. Sadly, my list is male. I'm still looking around, not sure about Alexander at Transport. I don't think I'm desperately looking for the woman who's going to make the breakthrough. But at the moment, people like Douglas Alexander, I think, is excellent, although he's not seen much in England because he's a Scottish minister. Peter Carl, Luke Pollard, they've got people who are beginning to come through under the Starmer regime. But for me, Wes Streeting, Rachel Reeves, and even the Home Secretary, not as much as you guys think.
I think with Wes Streeting, just give a couple of standout examples in terms of how good he is at both media performing, yes, but also his instinct in terms of saying the right thing to the party. So, the great soundbite for me was, to those immigrants who are worried, look, Labour said, this is your home. We're not saying to you, go home. This is your home. That was a great soundbite that he used a few times during the conference, got well received, of course. The other thing that he said, and I think he was the first one to say it, and then it was picked up by one or two others, but Wes was the first person to say it. Won't it be great to get Ange back? Gain a recognition that Angela Rayner, I'm sure he genuinely believes, is a miss from the government in terms of her authenticity. But more importantly, perhaps, in the context of a party conference, and you're trying to get that feel-good factor with the members, Wes Streeting was the first one out there saying, we want Angela back as soon as possible. And he didn't get drawn into the Burnham debate in the way that others did. He wasn't mean about Andy Burnham. He basically said, we want all of our top players on the pitch, and Andy Burnham is a top performer. He's doing a great job at Greater Manchester.
In Greater Manchester, yeah.
And we want him to continue. But,
do we seriously think that that Angela Rayner could make a comeback?
No, absolutely. Keir Starmer said this morning that he wants her back in the cabinet as soon as possible when the time is reasonable. And again, Jim, people in the party, and this is the problem when you're in that bubble. It's almost like the Westminster bubble, isn't it? It's the Labour Party bubble in a sense. But there is, an awful lot of feeling that Angela Rayner made a mistake, yes, but was perhaps too harshly punished. And of course, the immediate thing that they turn their attention to is Farage's controversy, which has not been as investigated as thoroughly by the media. And it was what his wife, who's got as I can tell, a moderately paid job, has gone off and bought a property in Clacton for over 800,000 quid. And nobody's asking how that was done. So people are sort of making those comparisons. And I don't think she's going to come back anytime quickly. Not into the cabinet at least, but it wouldn't surprise me if she was given the job, and I think Joe mentioned this a few weeks ago, a chair of a commission to look at welfare reform, something of that ilk that starts to give her a route back in. But for me, Wes Streeting was absolutely the star performer of the conference. Obviously, Starmer aside, because his speech did steal the show to an extent. I understand what you're saying about Shabana Mahmood, Jim, because that message is not going to win an awful lot of votes from the membership. But pragmatism does a lot to people in terms of the way they're thinking. And if immigration and crime and those issues that are starting to creep up the agenda in terms of what the polls are telling us as people's concerns, then she will definitely have a chance. And she's certainly smart. You can't deny that. And she's not scared to tell it how it is. And, she did that in spades for sure. So I thought she didn't do herself any harm, actually. The media love her, actually, from right across the spectrum. And Michael Gove, of all people, has said for him, she is by far the most impressive Labour politician. Again, that ain't going to do her massive favours with the Labour Party membership. However, I think on a serious note, it goes to the fact that she is a very impressive politician. So I wouldn't rule her out in terms of future leadership challenge. But for now, listen, Keir Starmer is not going anywhere. He's cemented his position as the Prime Minister. What happens to Andy Burnham now, Jim?
I think he's got to lick his wounds and get on with the job in Greater Manchester. I mean, there, as we've said ad infinitum on this podcast, there are two problems. And one is the logistics of him getting back to Westminster before 2028, when his mayoral period ends. You know, I've always thought it's highly problematic for him to abandon his mayoralty, which doesn't end till then. You know, any move, if Andrew Gwynn's seat in Denton and Gorton becomes available, would be under the huge spotlight. It would be seen as this path back to Westminster, and then when he was at Westminster, he'd be like the elephant in the room. You know, when's he going to make his move? I mean, if you actually think about it, and the way in which Starmer's people have sort of manoeuvred around him about the mayor's ambitions and so on, the spotlight would be on him so intensely. I think we'll hear less of this for now. I mean, it's a shame in a way, because Andy, you know, from a standing start, probably I would say, with the need to rebuild confidence in the Red Wall supporters in the north, that he would be the best person to be leader of the Labour Party, but he ain't available, and he has. You know, and he's also done, we haven't talked about it, but this business about not being in hock to the bond markets. I mean, that's something we must do a podcast on, because there are people quite close to me who have this very radical view about, you know, this insufferable pressure that's put on us by the bond markets and the debt and all this sort of stuff, and the idea that you can print money and that's the way out of it. It's a very interesting economic theory, but it's not for now. So I think we'll hear a little bit less from Andy for the time being.
I mean, my view, and I've said this for months now, haven't I, is that they ought to have found a much bigger role on the national stage for Burnham. And it would have killed, you said, Jim, previously, well, maybe Burnham wouldn't take that sort of job. I think it'd be hard for him to resist if you said, we're going to make you Minister for the regions, you can continue as Greater Manchester Mayor, we're going to put you in the Lords as well. How difficult or easy that would be, I don't know. But he is, other than Wes Streeting, Labour's best retail politician, and in the north.
But if you put him in the Lords, that's the end of his chances of ever being leader of the Labour Party.
Which is why I'm saying, if you, from Starmer's perspective, it kills two birds with one stone. If you're Andy, you might think, oh, I'm not signing up for that. But I think what it tells me this week, and I'm a big fan of Andy Burnham, as they came and did an event with us on Monday, great as ever, you know, on mental health action. He was really, really good on the subject. And he's been great for Manchester. But the idea that he's got a better than 20-1, 30-1 chance of being Prime Minister. And so if you were to say to Andy Burnham, we're going to make you Minister for the regions, give you responsibility for rolling out devolution across the country, which is something he is genuinely passionate about, and give him a serious role in government, but also put him up against Farage, because, as I say, he's our best retail politician, certainly in the Red Wall of the North. I think he'd find that difficult to resist. I may be wrong. But well, I think it would be a shame. It would be a shame, Jim, if, because of this local difficulty and domestic spat internally, Andy was not seen to be a central player moving forward.
Absolutely. The devolution agenda needs a shot in the arm, because I think the bullet that was dodged in Liverpool, if I was not the Conservatives, because what I'm about to say is that the annual conference of the political parties is the opportunity to shoot down all the rail investment in the north. 2 years ago, the Tories did it with HS2. Yeah. This year, we've had this further delay in the Liverpool to Hull rail, which I think is a total and utter disgrace. But again, that didn't get as much publicity as I thought it might.
Well, it was drowned out by the noise.
Yeah.
And as I say, that's why I think Andy helped Starmer inadvertently, and the party conference actually. But as I say, I hope that the party leadership doesn't become vindictive and start to try and sideline Andy, because of course there are other mayors around, and some capable mayors at that: Claire McGuinness, Tracy Brabham, Steve Rotherham, but none have got that X factor that Andy Burnham has.
And they would be silly to do that, because he's really well known and well liked outside of the Labour Party nationally. He's very recognisable. People genuinely feel an affinity towards him, which they don't feel to many politicians. And I would think that if there's any common sense, and particularly if Lucy Powell wins the deputy leadership, at some point in the next few months, maybe by Christmas or early in the new year, there will be something where Keir Starmer and Andy Burnham appear together, and something, as you're suggesting, Frank, as sort of a minister for devolution. Wasn't that the sort of the job that Sue Gray was supposed to be doing?
I can't
Been for about a week.
What happened to her? But we haven't mentioned the fact that we've had Labour and Lib Dem conferences, and nobody's mentioned Kemi Badenoch.
No, and there was a withering line from Keir Starmer in his speech, which was simply, the Conservatives, do you remember them?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that was it. And they are in huge trouble, and they've got their conference coming up in Birmingham. So we'll turn our attention. Manchester, sorry, Jane. So we will turn our attention to them next week. But you've mentioned Lucy Powell there, Joe, and it reminds me of a couple of other conversations I had during conference week, which was people saying, well, Lucy Powell, deputy leader, are the party really going to want a Manchester double act at the top of the party?
Yeah.
So where people are saying Lucy Powell, that is a way in for Andy Burnham, they're saying, well, actually, the argument will be, well, you can't have two bloody Manx sat at top of the party. So that was something else that was doing the rounds. But I do think that Andy will be somewhat regretful, certainly in terms of the timing and the way that the story got out of control, in a sense. Because the one thing that I am absolutely sure of is that Keir Starmer's performance, would not have been as good without that challenge from Andy Burnham. And two, I think some of the content and narrative would have continued to be overly cautious. I think Andy Burnham has massively helped Labour find its voice and its values again. And for that, he shouldn't be punished. He should be thanked. So, we will see how that plays out in the coming months. But as you rightly say, Joe, if there's a modicum of common sense, then Andy Burnham, they'll get him close again as quickly as they possibly can. Right, we're going to close for a brief moment, and when we come back, some sad news earlier this week, and that was the passing of a political giant. It was Min Campbell, and Joe certainly knew him very well, and Jim had interviewed him on a couple of occasions as well. So a tribute to him after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back to the final part of the Downtown Den Politics podcast. We have, of course, inevitably focused on all things Labour. So it's been their conference in Liverpool this week, but there was some sad news as we learned about the passing of Min Campbell, who was a giant within the Liberal Democrat Party, a Scottish MP of notoriety, who, of course, Joe, you will have known very well.
Yes, I did know Ming, and he was a wonderful man. He was actually the first person I went to see when Paddy appointed me his press secretary. And I said, give me some advice, Ming. He gave me a glass of champagne, and he gave me some very wise advice. And he was thoughtful, he was funny, he was seriously clever, because obviously he'd been a barrister. He was absolutely, devoted to Scotland. He was passionate. He was probably, in the same way that Paddy Ashton was probably the best foreign secretary we never had, Ming Campbell was probably the best defence secretary we never had. And he had a gravitas that carried us. You know, if you think about the time when Paddy and Ming were the sort of the two giants of the Liberal Democrats, during Bosnia, the breakup of Bosnia, and various other things going on around Iraq war and all of that, people listened to Ming Campbell. He was widely respected. It was a great shame that when he became leader of the party, his standing plummeted like a stone. He was seen as old, out of touch. I mean, as I pointed out to somebody at his first conference speech when he was leader, I said he's the same age as Mick Jagger. But, you know, that's where the comparison ends. And in a way, he was of a different time. You know, he was courteous, he was thoughtful. He would never have engaged in the sort of the gutter politics of today. But he was a great man, and he will be sadly missed by anyone who's had any dealings with him at all.
And as I said before we came on air, Joe, he was one of the voices within the Liberal Democrat team when the coalition was being negotiated, who was, well, certainly fearful of what it may do to the reputation of the Liberal Democrats if they did do that deal with the Conservatives. Subsequently, that proved to be the case. But he was very close to people like Gordon Brown, Robin Cook, Donald Dewar.
Yes, absolutely. And I remember going with Paddy to Ming and Elspeth's house in Edinburgh for a dinner. We were on our way somewhere or other. And around the table were Robin Cook and Charles Kennedy and Bob McLennan and Donald Dewar and Ian Lang, who some people as old as Jim will remember was the Scottish Secretary, Tory Scottish Secretary. And there was this real genuine warmth and genuine friendship. And the thing that struck me, and has stayed with me ever since, was that was a meeting of people who may have had mild political differences, but they were not tribal in the way that some you'd find it hard to see that sort of relationship, I think, in English politics, because their tribe above everything else was Scotland. And Ming was very much behind the scenes, in the very behind the scenes negotiations between Paddy and Tony Blair, with the possibility. And I think in a way he was sad that Nick Clegg took the decision to do a deal with David Cameron, but it was probably the right thing to do.
James, Ming Campbell, you interviewed him, I know.
Yes, I did. And I mean, let's reflect on, we always want our politicians nowadays to have a hinterland. And of course, he first came to prominence as an athlete. He competed for the Great Britain in the 200 meters and 4x100 meters relay at the 1964 Olympic Games, so he had a completely different career before embarking on the career of politics. North East Fife was his seat. It's a Liberal Democrat seat again now. The Liberal Democrats in Scotland, have an interesting history because it sort of, traditionally was a Labour fiefdom, but there was always a Scottish tradition. And obviously, Joe's talked about that. There was a sort of collegiality without giving anything away in terms of their political beliefs. There was a collegiality amongst the Scottish political giants of the time, Lang, Brown, Cook, people like that. Before he became leader, and perhaps that's why he became leader, he was very concerned about our involvement in the Iraq war and used all the moral authority that you guys have spoken about to talk about that. And then he was only leader really for 18 months. He came after Charles Kennedy finished, and that was an awkward time for the party because of Charles's personal problems. And when he finished, of course, it heralded the era of Nick Clegg, which I think was a mixed blessing for the Liberal Democrats personally. A real gent of the old school.
Yeah, and a dying breed, quite literally, I'm afraid to say, because as Joe's pointed out, the nuance, the grey that is politics really, is so much black and white these days, and that would not have suited somebody like Ming Campbell or many of the other people that reigned in those days in terms of the political giants.
Well, I think Jim's phrase, moral authority. There are very few politicians these days of any party who have got moral authority.
Yeah, no, it's sad, isn't it? It's very sad. But yes, may he rest in peace, and he will certainly be very well remembered. And I never had the pleasure of meeting him like you two guys. So thank you for your reflections there. Right, well, next week we will be back, of course, to our usual slot of Monday. And we will be talking about the Conservative Party conference in Manchester. Thanks for that, James. And we'll also turn our attentions as well to foreign affairs, because we've let them alone for the past couple of weeks. And hard to keep up with what the Mad Orangeman is doing over in the States, both in terms of domestically and foreign affairs. But listen, by this time next week, Tony Blair might be Prime Minister of Gaza, so watch this space. Have a great week, what's left of it, guys, and we will see you all again next week. Thanks for listening.